Like to deliberate.
Oh, yeah, sir.
Thank you. Okay, so the way I look at this is I really feel that although we try to mitigate as best we can, we do our EIRs and other processes, it's clear that there are projects whose effects are not fully mitigated in the community. And I am interested in making sure that as we go forward, things like SB 50, school impact fees, which we know don't cover all the impacts, we have an opportunity to address. And we talked a lot to developers about processes in the spring. We had various ad hoc meetings and what could we do to ensure that we found some sort of legal process. We looked at all these formulaic approaches that were sort of, where we tried to engineer the heck out of it. Morgan Hill has such a very formulaic process, and what they've found is it's too rigid, that, at the end of the day, they're forced in some cases, right, to basically approve projects that they don't necessarily want. I think what we've gotten to is a process that is, as I understand from attorneys, bulletproof. That is, it is not challengeable by the BIA, by developers, because we're simply using our legislative power to consider these things on a GPA basis. Somebody wanting to build outside of the envelope of the general plan is looking for an entitlement that they don't have by right. The only right they have is if we grant it. And in my view, to exceed the limit or boundaries of the general plan in some way ought to come with some help to our infrastructure in those cases where it's appropriate. But I think, to Gilbert's point, we can evaluate these on a case-by-case basis, and we should. And we ought to look at the project on its merits first and foremost. That's the essence of the thing. And then the question is, okay, so now what? Are our schools fully covered if we build this project? Yes, no. We need to understand that. You can't determine a priori I would say you can't determine a priori whether a school benefits from or is damaged by or hurt by a development proposal. You've really got to get into the specifics. Likewise, green spaces, trails, as Barry has championed, traffic, all of these things we have to understand well. And we mitigate as we practically can, but at the end of the day, right, we have to look at the thing in totality. So the way I really do look at this is not something where we're simply comparing and choosing. We're forced to choose any of them. All we're doing is aligning them at the same time with the hopes that the developers will effectively put their best foot forward. But I don't know anybody in the community that would be much in favor of a project that doesn't satisfy community values, even if it came with a pot of money. Nobody wants a bad project. But of course, our view of what is good and bad may vary, but at the end of the day, this process gives council, as it has today, complete discretion. The only thing we're doing is trying to bring them together so we can look at them at the same time, and I think that will encourage us to be able to look at better projects than we would have otherwise. So I'm also in support of the project. I think annual, frankly, would work for me, but I understand the twice-a-year process, and I can accept that. Now, are there more questions or comments?
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question. So, Vice Mayor Chang?
Yes.
So, to allow more flexibility, are you open to, instead of 30 days, to give them 60 to 90 days? Because I don't think they can turn around in 30 days.
Fine, within 90 days, but that's fine.
Okay.
But you have to understand, if they do at the end.
Yeah, the longer they wait,
the longer they wait, it will be another 90 days. They can submit it again. You know that, right?
Right.
Okay.
But I think they want to be within that period.
Right.
Staff have any thoughts on that, or, you know, or the merits of the timing of that?
No,
Not really.
we'll have to, so the deadline will be 90 days, and we'll have to look at when we can schedule the next meeting. It'll be probably close to that 6-month date, but somewhere in between.
Yeah, I think 30-day probably a little bit too short for them to make the, for the developer to make the.
Well, but if you're giving them a chance to come back after 6 months and not a year,
That's not what the staff suggested. They get to come back a year later.
No.
I'm just making a
very
request.
confused
I'm just
now.
making a
I'm
request.
very
I'm
confused.
changing it. I'm changing it. I'm making a request.
To 90 days.
Correct. I mean, yes.
90 day after they deny, they can resubmit it right away. And then if they did not make it, that.
Then they come back 6 months, yeah, for the second period, yes.
so,
Yes.
but let me see if I understand the schedule here. If we did it on 90 days, then staff has to still evaluate that, provide feedback to council. So are we then going to butt up against the
Yeah,
6-month
typically, by
window?
the time we have a chance to actually evaluate the proposal and bring it back, it'll probably take about 45 days, right? Because we need some time, and then we need a public hearing. So we don't have an opinion about how long the council wants to give. It was just a piece of information we thought we'd convey to you.
Right, I think that after the first process, they should know what the community want, what the council want, and then the developer has to evaluate to see if they can make it or not. And then, so if they want to do it, they really want to do it, they can come back.
But presumably then, somebody who was, I think if I'm thinking about the downside correctly, we say, okay, we're going to have this thing, submit, we do the first we take the submittals.
Right.
The staff processes them for what, 45 days? Something like that?
But typically, because we need to have.
You need time to go put together
Right, and then
your
notice it.
evaluation.
We have to also
And
have a
notice it
notice.
and so forth. And then, I mean, okay, if we're doing this twice a year, that's kind of a big day for the community, because we're going to be looking at all these new things. And
Right.
maybe it's one new thing, maybe it's a lot of new things, whatever. But then, if we then delay and open the window up for another 90 days before the next submittal, and then 45 days past that, it seems like we're almost bumping up against the 6-month cycle. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
45 plus 90 plus 45, and you're now to half a year.
No. So what my understanding Gilbert has is instead of 30 days.
Up to 90 days,
Up to 90 days.
up to 60 to 90 days.
They don't
The
have to
faster-
use up to 90
No.
And then that 90 day will be
Well, yeah, but I
incorporated in
mean,
45 days.
but if we do that,
45 day will
then-
be- 45 day will be in the 90 day, right? My understanding.
And, no, if they get up to 90 days, then we have to wait for that 90 days before we evaluate all of them and bring them, right? So you're creating a
evaluating
deadline,
together, right?
and you
Right,
have to
so-
wait till the
so
deadline.
My next question is, how soon they can come back? Do you know? Do you have some sense?
I don't know. It depends on how, we're assuming that the ones who are coming back for a second chance are the
Right.
ones that need a very slight adjustment. If they need a major adjustment, they should probably rethink and evaluate. It'll probably take them a good 6 months.
Sure.
But if they're just doing a slight adjustment, I would think in 45 days or
All right, so
of
45 day will
60
be
maybe,
okay?
I don't know. But they should be able to, if we're looking at large changes, they're not going to be able to do it within that time
All right, so
frame.
let me
So
ask-
kind of like going back to what you're saying, Vice Mayor Chang, is that if there was like a major company that wants to come in or a really super duper hotel, then they would have to wait 6 months to come back.
Yeah.
Right, so,
I think that's too long.
Well,
That's too
we
long.
know you don't like the process, but I guess the question is, if
So-
I'm
so 90
understanding the
days.
time frame correctly, we have the first deadline, evaluate for 45, we have the council meeting, properly noticed, the whole community gets to see what's going on. As soon as the deadline hits, we unveil these proposals, and then 45 days of noticing, evaluation by the community, et cetera. And then at the end of that time, we have a meeting and we have this first gate. And then thereafter, I think what you're proposing is 30 days and then we go through another, maybe if it's smaller this time, we have a shorter evaluation period than 45?
Yes, a lot of it depends on how long we take to evaluate it, and
Yeah.
typically, we'll need at least 2 weeks if it's not too big.
Okay.
But then we have to notice, and we need a lot of headroom for noticing. Typically, it's 3 weeks
right, so-
to get it in the
When
paper
you be
for the right
continuing
date.
the item, I mean, let's say it's 30 days.
Right.
So you give the applicant 30 days, you just be continuing the item. You wouldn't be.
You could continue the item for the notice, but to have a staff report out in time, it might take some time. So it all depends on what the expectations are. We're not going to be sending another.
If it was a
yeah.
very large project, how can the applicant do it in 30 days?
Right, most likely not. If it's a large project, you're right, they're going to have to wait for
So
6
if you hear what RT said, if it's a large project, they can't do it in 30 days.
If it's a large change,
All
they
right,
can't
so-
do it in
so-
30 days.
so-
But that's why we have another whole cycle, right?
Let me ask you a question. 45 days will be good enough?
Sure.
I mean,
I guess that's a good compromise. You know, we'll have to look at it and see how it works.
Okay.
We're assuming that these changes are not large, the ones that are getting the second chance.
Right.
And if they have to go and redo the entire project and the site plan and the pro forma and everything, it's definitely, Councilmember Wong is right, it's going to definitely need a lot more time.
And another question to
But then
ask.
that would be the next cycle.
so Councilmember Wang, would 45 days okay with you?
It will not. I mean, it will not. I mean, I feel that more is better. And if you kind of look, I mean, here we have, like Jennifer Griffin, Stephen Sharp, Better Cupertino, Cupertino Concerned Citizens, Chamber of Commerce, Apple Inc., all saying they would like status quo. So so if your concern is mainly that you want a process for community benefits or voluntary.
No, that's not what we said.
Well, I'm speaking to Barry. I wasn't speaking to you, Mr. Mayor. Is you want a community benefits that's voluntary program, correct?
Right.
I think that it can be done. I'm saying honestly, it can be done through a development agreement. Is that correct, city
Right.
staff? That we can do the same thing through a development agreement.
Right, but see, Councilmember Wang, that's what been practiced in the past, all this year. And as I say earlier, it's apparently it's not working. I mean, we got a problem with the school, we got a problem with the traffic. I mean, we got all kind of problem now. And then we don't have money. I mean, you and I know that the city doesn't have the money to solve the problem. Okay, and then the community member is upset about that, why we are not solving the problem. So what are you going to do? And then they say, you cannot do this, you cannot do that. Then what are we going to do? Sitting here, idle?
Right, but I don't want to give a perception to the community that if you do X, Y, if you give me my hotel and my height, I'll give you X, Y, Z. I would rather hear the application, let it go through its natural process, have it go through a public hearing at the end. Because you kind of ask, what's the difference of the development agreement? Here, what staff is suggesting is to hear all the benefits in the beginning, and then what we're doing currently, and Vice Mayor Chang is correct, is that we're hearing it toward the end. I think that for the community, to be fair, it should be heard at the end and not at the beginning.
Well,
Because then,
you're right, but they're not happy. They say you're hiding it. You don't tell us.
Right.
And so
And-
now
and-
we want to change and say, okay, we incorporate you guys
I
ahead of
understand, I
time,
understand. But
right?
again,
and if you guys still want to accuse us, so be it. I mean, what can you do? I mean, this is part of it.
I understand. But again, community, and I think that there was no hidden agenda or anything, that they said 2 council members met with landowners, and that was a legitimate thing. I mean, I didn't hear about it. I was not invited to it. But again, it gives a perception that we're hiding something from the community, and I don't think those 2 council members who went, which I later found out from staff, was trying to improve the process with the other program
I
that
can
was...
speak to that because I was one of the
I want
council
to finish my
members.
thought. The community business incentive zoning that Morgan Hill has adopted, and something similar to what Mountain View is doing as well too, and the growth management program. But again, I think that we're just going to get a huge hit on the council if we adopt this new process.
And if I can speak to that,
Okay.
I've attended many meetings with community members as well as people who asked me to meet with them to discuss several things. And way back in March, I was absolutely new to this process. The word community benefit was new to me, which is why in the month of December, I postponed discussing the GPA process because there were so many new terms. So yes, I attended a meeting to understand what the process was all about. And I think that was in March.
No, the question is, answer your question is, you think a 30 days is too short, you want a 90-day, right?
Right.
And then the staff is worried about, and the mayor is worried about is bumping up to each other.
What about if we made it 6 months? Then it'd just be an even cycle. Then it basically we'd be
Yeah, but
doing
then-
it twice a year.
But then you're talking about within 6 months?
Well, say we just,
Pew, what
for
do you
the
think?
benefit to do something outside of the general plan, if we said, we're going to look at things every 6 months and give, rather than spreading it out through the year, twice a year, for people that, not for everybody, right?
All right.
Only for these people that want an exception. Every 6 months we say, fine, come in and give it your best shot. Very simple, right?
Yeah, but then we just talk about, but if then that means they have to wait for 6 months.
Right.
If they submitted the first round, did not make it,
Yeah.
minor change, and they were willing to do it, now they have to wait 6 months.
Remember that, let's say we close the gate, right?
Right.
We say, okay, now we're going to reveal all the proposals we've gotten from the last 6 months, say, or whatever. We reveal all those projects. The staff is going to need, depending on how many there are, say, 45 days to evaluate all of them, right? And then, and have a notice to a public meeting that we'll have, we've got to have time for the community to have a thorough look at the proposals. We can't post them the night before. We've got to have good noticing. We've got to have good and transparent information for us to evaluate, as well as we can't do it 3 days before, in other words, right? It's got to be posted well in advance. And what I'm saying is, by the time we then have the meeting and developers have time to cycle, I think we're beginning to run into that 6 months. So what I might suggest to you is, okay, the next, we'll have that next submittal 6 months later.
Right, so that means, that pretty much you're cutting off the appeal, pretty much.
Well,
And then
just a
we're talking about, if there's a major company, new company want to come in town, and they cannot wait for 6 months, then we run into this problem.
Well,
So I think
so it's an encouragement for them to put their best foot forward the first time, right?
Yeah, but then they probably don't know what the council want. I mean, each council, 5 council members have what they perceive, what they would like to see this town leading to, right? So you ask them, all the developer, and then you have this accusation that you are not supposed to meet with the developer, which is wrong. In my opinion,
I
that's
think
nothing wrong
developers
with
are
it.
going to continue to meet with council members.
Right.
They can continue to do outreach in the community before they get to the submittal point,
Right.
right? I think they can do all those things, and they have been, and they do in every city, right? They reach out to the community, they have outreach meetings, they have discussions with us, and then at some point, okay, now it's time to submit. And then the only real question is, how frequently do you want that to be?
No, frequency is twice a year, okay?
Okay.
Right? It just, if they did not make it to the top, to the cut,
Right.
then they should be able to have the right to appeal right away. And I think a 30-day will be fine.
So you go back to 30.
I'll go back to 30.
Maybe, I could support
I mean,
that, because what
9 months.
it does is it says that's for the small stuff. If it's
Right.
bigger,
It should be,
right?
should be small stuff. The big stuff, it will be.
Yeah, we ought to be
Yeah,
responsive,
yeah,
right?
right.
I get that. I'm okay with that idea. Huh?
I'm okay with the 30-day idea, too. If it's a small appeal, that's how it should be, otherwise it should be in the next cycle.
Right.
Just so we understand it, maybe, may I just kind of describe it so I understand what's being proposed,
Sure,
discussed? Applications get a chance to apply 2 times a year. So they don't have to wait an entire year if they're
Right.
rejected. And then in each of those 2 sessions, they can everybody can choose to reapply within 30 days of the decision,
They did not make it.
if they didn't make it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And hopefully, we're then able to run, I mean, the idea, right, is hopefully there's a short process we can evaluate. And if it really is a big change, we may just say, look, we can't deal with it somehow, I don't know.
Well, if they submitted
Applicants aren't going to be
it,
able to make a big change in 30 days, so it's
Right.
by definition going to be small.
Definition.
they can make a minor adjustment in 30 days.
So clarification is that then the council can't make a decision until they come back in 30 days so we can evaluate everybody all at once.
Correct.
Yeah, by the time
That's
we
the
make,
Whoever reapplies.
my
yes.
understanding is by,
No, I mean, what the mayor said, I mean, that's also my understanding too, is that you would have to wait 30 days.
they have to wait 45 days, right?
30, no, no.
30 days.
Only the ones that were
45 or
rejected.
30?
We're going to have a first thing, we're going to evaluate for 40, staff is
30
going to
days.
evaluate, say, 45 days. Then we're going to give those who failed, who want to come back with small changes,
Right.
a 30-day window to reapply. At
Right.
the end of that, staff does the smaller, shorter incremental evaluation.
Right.
We say yes or no, and then we move on to the next cycle,
Right.
right?
Right. But then if they come back in 30 days, do you need to go through that full process of 45-day noticing everything?
Well, I guess we could talk about it, whether it's a continued hearing. I think usually we would have to renotice because we don't know how, unless you continue to a date certain. But that's not easy, right? We could always continue it to a date certain. I guess it depends on the process. In the future, you have different options.
It's hard to
You can
do that because
renotice.
you just said that it takes you 45 to 30 days to process these things, and it could be very simple or it can be very complicated.
Right.
Maybe a big application can do it in 30 days. You never know, right?
Yeah, I think we'll have to take it as it comes, as we do everything else. We may not have all the decisions up front. If we're able to continue, if there are minor changes and we can continue to a date certain, we know they're going to make minor changes. If we think that they're going to come back with, then we can renotice.
Okay. Would somebody like to make this motion?
I'll make a motion.
Okay.
I make a motion to adopt the resolution number 15-078, adopting procedure for authorizing the processing of general plan amendment application with the amendment we just discussed here.
The amendments
is-
being that
changes.
applicants can apply twice a year.
Twice a
The
year.
rejected ones don't have to wait, and then anybody can apply in that 30-day window if they want
For
to
the
make a
appeal.
change.
Right.
If they're rejected.
If they are rejected, then they can apply for the appeal
Right.
in 30 days.
So it sounds like it's pretty much the staff proposal, except we're allowing an applicant that failed the process to come back, not in a year, but in 6 months.
Plus one more, Vice Mayor Chang said that they can come back in 6 months versus 1 year.
That's just what I said, Gilbert.
That's right.
Okay, just want to make sure.
And then-
I didn't hear that.
And then there's no discretion of the council to decide which one can come back. All the applicant, if they fail to make it, they can come back.
Within the 30 days, yes.
Right, within that 30-day window time.
Any applications that were rejected
Right.
have a chance to come
Right.
back in 30
Yeah.
days.
And Vice Mayor Chang, I'd also like to say with sufficient noticing to the public.
Oh, yeah. You could-
We actually have that already. It talks about postcard noticing.
It was brought up, it
and
was
meetings.
raised, so.
Yes, yes. And we're happy to revise the community amenities thing to say if they're provided, in order to provide upfront notice to the public, they should provide it now rather than at the end of the process. That really was our intent. It wasn't our intent to require it. It was just to address the comments we've heard before, which is we never hear about these things until the end. So.
If we do this, it seems to me that we have a regular schedule and members of the public don't have to wonder what's going on at City Hall.
Right.
Because we will have
Right. I do have to
had
say,
a
though.
specific date, a specific time of the year, twice a year, right?
Right, so
Actually.
we'll have 2 postcard notices every year. The second 30-day one, we won't have time to do postcards, but, we'll be able to
Got it.
send
But
them.
they'll have notice because they would have attended the meeting right here.
Right, and we'll have a
We'll talk
website
about
that, like we've had websites in the past on projects and communicated with the public.
You need a second.
Oh, of course, I need a second, yes.
Okay, I second Vice Mayor Chang's motion with those conditions attached, that about the noticing as well as the change in language for community amenities.
Thank you.
Good.
And then,
I will support the motion.
Oh, I just want to deliberate, just for the record, I want to be entered in the record that, again, I appreciate staff's hard work and input, and the reason I just want to go on record that I oppose this, this resolution, and the speakers who spoke tonight spoke very eloquently, and it's really nice to see people like Jennifer Griffin, Stephen Sharp, Berta Cupertino, Cupertino Concerned Citizens, CARES, BIA, Cupertino Chamber of Commerce, and Apple Inc., our largest employer, does not support this process, supports the status quo. I want to go on record that a lot of folks have a lot of angst on the December 4th City Council meeting, and I think that we have scheduled that on October 20th, 2015, so it's very important that we don't postpone that and address that issue, and I hope that we can do some kind of community workshop, even though I know RT tirelessly in her planning department met with various stakeholders, but I think that this is not the right way to change this process. This process is not good for Cupertino.
I also want to go on the record as opposing this, and I want to provide the reasons why. I think this is very wasteful. I think it's ill-considered. I think it's going to create at least 2 meetings for general plan amendments every year, whereas in the past we could have up to 4, but we don't necessarily have up to 4 or even 2 or 3. So I think we're losing a lot of flexibility here, and we're inviting 4 meetings every year, in fact, because there's this appeal process. So we're going to have these 2 meetings, and we're going to have the appeal follow up 30 days afterward. Second, I don't think that we've established that this process is actually going to get us more or better community benefits. There's been no discussion as to whether, given our current incentive structure, where there's no allocation set aside for these various items like height or office square footage or hotel, that as conditions exist right now, the developers don't already have the incentive to entice the community and the city council. And if you look at the development applications that are out there or prospectively out there, you can see that the developers are already looking at this and providing those incentives on their own. Finally, I don't think this is a good idea because the overwhelming sentiment of the community, as well as those people in a position to put forth these applications, don't want it. I think that we're ultimately going to be spending a lot of time, a lot of resources, and not getting any different results. And in fact, we're going to be inviting meetings where none would have necessarily existed in the first place.
Okay, with that, I guess we can vote.
Oh, I misvoted. I'm sorry.
Can we redo that?
You're too excited, huh?
Force of habit.
And the motion carries with Wong and Paul voting no.
Okay, thank you very much.